Good evening, everybody. My name is Owen Weinberg. I am the director of the National Library of Israel. Welcome to Jerusalem and to the third gathering of the Global Forum of the National Library of Israel, Migration, Borders, Identity. As in years past, we are all looking forward to many stimulating and meaningful conversations over the next few days, and thank you all for joining us. As many of you know, the new National Library is now being built next to the Knesset, and we do hope to hold our next gathering in our wonderful new home, which will have state-of-the-art facilities to serve many visitors, users, and audiences all at once. We will now watch a brief film about the renewal of the National Library of Israel and our new home. Could you please all turn your phones to silent mode?
כבר יותר מ-120 שנה, הספרייה הלאומית בירושלים היא מפעל שימור התרבות וההיסטוריה היהודית והישראלית. הלב הפועם של העם היהודי. ובמקום הזה, בבניין הזה, נמצאים כמה מהאוצרות הכמוסים והמרתקים בעולם.
ספרייה היא בית מדרש, ובית מדרש במציאות הישראלית צריך להכיל את כל הריבוי הזה. האנשים האלה שבאים לספרייה, הם מרגישים שם בבית, כי האוסף מייצג אותם.
What's special about the Islam Middle East collection is that it enables us to understand and learn and to assimilate the ideas of the region that we live in. And it's an opportunity for us to go beyond the Jewish world and to understand the connections between the Jewish and Islamic worlds.
דרכו של הלימוד היהודי, המסורתי, הייתה ברעש, והלימוד בתנועה ורעש מאפיינת את הלימוד היהודי, להבדיל מהתנועה הזאת, הספרנית הזאת של שקט, דממה מוחלטת. אנחנו צריכים למצוא את האיזון בין השניים.
הרבה פעמים שואלים אותי, מהו הפריט שעדיין חסר לך? התשובה האמיתית מבחינתי היא שכל פריט ופריט, והספרייה הלאומית מוסיפה מאות אלפי פריטים בכל שנה ושנה, אני מרגיש שזה איזשהו קיר שאנחנו בונים, נדבך אחר נדבך, בסיפור של העם היהודי ומדינת ישראל.
הספרייה הלאומית נמצאת בעיצומו של תהליך התחדשות שמטרתו להפוך אותה לשחקן מרכזי בחיים התרבותיים של אזרחי ישראל, יהודי התפוצות וכלל הציבור בעולם. במסגרת תהליך זה עוברים מיליוני פריטים תהליך דיגיטלי של שימור, עיבוד וסריקה ומונגשים להמונים. ממאות אלפי ספרים, מפות וכתבי יד, דרך חומרי שמע, פריטי ארכיון יוצאי דופן וכלה באוספים נדירים. הכל נחשף והופך נגיש מדי יום למיליוני אנשים ברחבי העולם. בניין הספרייה החדש ייבנה בקריית הלאום בירושלים מול בניין הכנסת ובסמוך למוזיאון ישראל. המבקרים במשכן החדש יענו מ6 קומות של אולמות קריאה מתקדמים, מתחם תרבות וחינוך מגוון ומרכז מבקרים משוכלל.
האתגר הגדול שלנו בבניין החדש זה איך לתכנן בניין שיהיה מתאים למגוון של פעילויות בו זמנית. גם לתת את הסביבה האקדמית הראויה, את השקט הראוי, להכיל מבקרים, ליצור פה פעילות תרבותית ולא לפגוע בסביבה הראויה של החוקרים.
The building reflects the history and the history is reflected in the building. It's literally carved out like a piece of stone, like a book that you open. The circle is, of course, bringing daylight in. But the circle continues its way down to the sea of books where the books are stored. So it's like a water pond, like a well. So it's related even to history, to find water.
The concept or the plan for the new library is the country is to open, to welcome, to be transparent, to bring in as much as possible of different kinds of people.
You do building that make people happy. That is a place that people want to go. They want to be at that new place because it's part of their heart.
I know what it means for Israeli people. I know what it means also to the world. So it's not only a Jewish project. I think from my point of view, it's a project that goes beyond that.
עם פתיחתו של המבנה החדש תימשך הפעילות התרבותית העשירה המביאה לספרייה קהלים רחבים. במקביל תימשך פעילות המחקר, השימור וההנגשה של התרבות היהודית והישראלית באמצעים הטכנולוגיים המתקדמים ביותר. זאת כדי לשמור על מעמדה של הספרייה הלאומית כמוסד המוביל בארץ ובעולם באיסוף ובשימור של אוצרות העם היהודי בישראל ובתפוצות.
Until the new building is completed, and in order not to disturb the scholars in our current home, the forum sessions will be held in other venues. Here at the Mishkanot She'ananim, at the Inbal Hotel, which will host most of the sessions, and one special event at the National Library tomorrow evening. Translation will be available throughout the conference. Please make sure that you have earphones if you need them. Channel 1 is for Hebrew, Channel 2 for English. We ask Global Forum members and invited guests who will be joining us for dinner and the evening program to remain in their seats at the conclusion of the program tonight. Those who wish can enjoy the short walk to the Inbal Hotel directed by our staff. A shuttle van will be also depart from the entrance to the Mishkanot She'ananim after we will leave the auditorium. Please note that the proceedings of the forum will be filmed and presented to the public via the National Library website. Anyone with issues regarding consent should speak to a member of the library staff. The production team, ushers, and the National Library staff will be pleased to assist you if you have any questions or requests. Thank you once again for being here. It is now my pleasure to introduce our special musical guest tonight, Mr. Arkady Duchin. Arkady Duchin is a singer, writer, and producer whose songs have touched Israelis for decades, entering the national soundtrack and consciousness. Born in Belarus in 1963, Arkady made Aliyah, moved to Israel with his family at the age of 15, when he began to write his first songs in Hebrew. The first song Arkady will perform tonight has become almost a national hymn for many. It would be hard to find an Israeli that doesn't know the song by heart. There is love in me, yesh bi ahava. Many have discussed the distinct possibility that this song is also about the love of Israel. The words and music are by Arkady Duchin. Arkady, the stage is yours.
תודה רבה. ערב טוב, אני הסתכלתי על הנושא, בחרתי בשיר הזה כי באמת הגעתי לישראל בגיל 16, אני לא נולדתי כאן. והיה לי שתי מטרות, אחד זה באמת להשתלב בתור אזרח וללמוד שפה ולהיות כמו כולם, והמטרה השנייה הייתה יותר מסובכת, זה להיות מוזיקאי, כי בעצם הגעתי מין על התפר כזה שכבר להשיג את המטרה השנייה היה לי קצת יותר מסובך, אבל זה קרה והצלחתי. עשיתי המון דברים במוזיקה, אבל כל הזמן הרגשתי קצת שייך בכל זאת לשם, לרוסיה, אפילו שזה לא מקום קל. והמשכתי להצליח ולעשות דברים, ואז כתבתי שירים לאריק איינשטיין. עכשיו, בשביל אריק איינשטיין זה באמת מישהו שמסמל את ההתחלה של המקום הזה של ישראל במוזיקה. לפחות זרם מסוים בטוח ייזכר כזרם שאריק התחיל פה. בגלל זה אני החלטתי להתחיל עם השיר הזה שנקרא יש באהבה, כי זה שיר שבמקור אני כתבתי אותו לאריק. כאילו אריק העניק לי בזכות השיר הזה סוג של תעודה. זהו, מעכשיו אתה אחד משלנו, ארכדי. כי לכתוב לאריק זה בעצם לבלד עוד פעם בישראל. בין האפל הנסתר, בעולמנו הצר, אומרים יש עוד תקווה, קוראים לזה אהבה, ומחכים לבואה. בין האתמול לעתיד, בין האוצר לתחתית, יש עוד תקווה, קוראים לזה אהבה, מחכים לבואה. בין הבלבול לאסון, תדעו שיש פתרון, קוראים לזה אהבה. בין הזיוף לאמת, בין כל מה שחי לאמת, ישנה אהבה. יש בי אהבה, והיא תתעורר ותיגע. יש בי אהבה, והיא תנצח. יש בי אהבה, והיא תתעורר ותיגע. יש בי אהבה, והיא תנצח. בין הילדות לזקנה, בין השפיות לשינה, יש עוד תקווה, קוראים לזה אהבה, מחכים לבואה. בין האתמול לעתיד, בין האוצר לתחתית, יש עוד תקווה, קוראים לזה אהבה, מחכים לבואה. בין הבלבול לאסון, תדעו שיש פתרון, קוראים לזה אהבה. בין הזיוף לאמת, בין כל מה שחי לאמת, ישנה אהבה. יש בי אהבה, והיא תתעורר ותיגע. יש בי אהבה, והיא תנצח. יש בי אהבה, והיא תתעורר ותיגע. יש בי אהבה, והיא תנצח. תודה רבה.
Thank you, Arkady. We'll hear you again in a few moments. I would like now to invite Mr. David Bloomberg to say a few words. David is the chairman of the National Library of Israel Board of the Directors and has been leading the renewal of the library for more than a decade. Please, David.
ערב טוב. ראשית מילת רקע. חשבנו שראוי שדברים שיישא יושב ראש הדירקטוריון של הספרייה הלאומית של מדינת ישראל ינסעו בעברית. ולכן אנחנו מקפידים על זה שהדברים שלי יהיו אכן בעברית. מכובדיי היקרים, אני שמח ונרגש לפתוח בירושלים את הכינוס השלישי של הפורום הבינלאומי של הספרייה הלאומית, ואני מודה לכולכם על השתתפותכם בו. הפורום הוא מרכיב מרכזי בתוכנית ההתחדשות אותה עוברת הספרייה הלאומית. הספרייה שאנו עמלים על התחדשותה נועדה למתוח גשר חי, המחבר את תבונת הדורות עם עולמנו אנו, עם ההווה ועם האתגר שבנייתו של המחר. על פי החזון שמנחה אותנו, הספרייה אכן הולכת והופכת למוקד אינטלקטואלי תוסס, שלוקח חלק משמעותי בחיי התרבות, החברה והרוח של ישראל והעם היהודי. כינונו וכינוסו של הפורום הבינלאומי של הספרייה הלאומית הינו ביטוי לדרך חדשה זו. הפורום נועד לסייע לספרייה המתחדשת בשליחותה, מצויה כאן באולם עוצמה מאוד לא שגרתית של תבונה, עומק אינטלקטואלי, ידע היסטורי, רגישות תרבותית ואהבה לספר ולספרים. מגוון התחומים מהם באים חברי הפורום וההישגים המרשימים של כל אחד מהם בתחומו מבטיחים לנו חגיגת חוכמה מרתקת וחוויה אינטלקטואלית נדירה. נושאו של הכינוס הפעם, הגירה, גבולות, זהות. משחר ההיסטוריה, תנועות ההגירה מהוות מנוע לשינוי רב עוצמה, המשפיע על מגוון תחומים רחב. גלי ההגירה חוצים גבולות ויוצרים מפגש בין תרבויות, העשוי ללבוש פנים שונות ומגוונות. שבר, איום והתנגשות זהויות מזה, אך גם מוקד לתרומה הדדית ולהתפתחות תרבותית מזה. דיוני הכינוס יעסקו באתגרים ובהזדמנויות שתופעת ההגירה מציבה בפני המדינה והתרבות. הדיונים יעסקו הן בממד האוניברסלי והן בממד הישראלי והיהודי, תוך התייחסות לגלות מארץ ישראל, לנדודים, לקיבוץ גלויות ולציונית המתייחדת במשקלם של המניעים הרעיוניים הדוחפים לחזרה אל המולדת ההיסטורית. כידוע, עם ישראל נדד באין ספור נתיבי הגירה ב4,000 שנות קיומו. אם תרצו, אברהם אבינו היה המהגר הראשון. לשם מעצב לך לך, הוא עזב את ארם נהריים ותקע יתד בארץ המובטחת. שתי מילים קצרות אלו, לך לך, הדהדו באוזני החלוצים הראשונים, מגשימי הציונות שהגיעו ארצה לבנות ולהיבנות בה. אגב, באמונת אחינו המוסלמים שגור המושג היג'רה, הגירה. מוחמד, מייסד האסלאם, היגר במאה השביעית מן העיר מכה אל העיר מדינה, ושתיהן מהוות עד היום מוקדים של עלייה לרגל בערב הסעודית. בחלוף הדורות עמנו נאלץ לחפש לו חופי מבטחים הרחק ממולדתו. גלינו לקצות העולם, נאחזנו במורשתנו, והספר שימש לנו מולדת מטלטלת כניסוחו של היינריך היינה. אוצרות הספרייה הלאומית כוללים רבים מנכסי הרוח הללו שנתחברו במזרח ובמערב. הספרייה הלאומית גאה לכנוס אל אוצרותיה שהולכים ומתעשרים יצירות מופת שנדדו עם בעליהן ברחבי העולם. אחרי מאות שנים הם מצאו להן בית בירושלים. תהליך התחדשותה של הספרייה בנוי על שני צירים, הציר הפיזי וציר התוכן. בצד הפיזי אנו עוסקים בהקמת משכנה החדש של הספרייה הלאומית, מפעל מרהיב שיוסיף עוד יהלום לכתרה של עיר הנצח ירושלים. הציר השני, ציר התוכן, מורכב הרבה יותר. הוא כרוך בהרחבה מתמשכת של האוספים, בגיוונם, בקטלוג הקפדני, בהכנת תוכניות חינוך, תרבות והנגשה המבוססות על האוספים האלה, וביכולת שלנו להביא את הציבור הרחב, הן בארץ והן בחוץ לארץ, לעשות שימוש באוצרות הספרייה. אם להשלמת הציר הפיזי נותרו כשנתיים וחצי, הרי לציר התוכן גם 200 שנה לא יספיקו. אך אנו נחושים לאמוס את המלאכה על כתפינו ולשאת בה מתוך מחויבות, אהבה והכרה עמוקה בחשיבותה ובנטל המוטל על כתפינו. רבותיי, אנו מבקשים לכונן מוסד תרבותי אשר יהווה בית לכל אזרחי ישראל, יהודים ובני דתות אחרות כאחד. בית מסביר פנים, הפותח שעריו לכל שוחרי הדעת בישראל, בעולם היהודי ובעולם בכלל. אנו רואים בספרייה הלאומית גם בית ועד לחכמים, להוגים, למלומדים, מקום מפגש למחקר משותף להחלפת דעות, השקפות ורעיונות. מקום שבו תשמש הסביבה כמפגש של תרבויות. הספרייה תעניק בכך ביטוי תוסס ויוצר לחזון כי מציון תצא תורה, לאפיונו של העם היהודי כעם הספר, ולכך שהספר במשמעותו העמוקה הינו המכונן המרכזי של הזהות היהודית. אנחנו בספרייה נאבקים למען דמוקרטיזציה של הידע. אנו מאמינים כי ככל שנהפוך לחופשית יותר את הגישה לאוצרות החוכמה והידע, כך נתרום לחוסנה של חברה טובה, סובלנית ונאורה יותר, הנותנת זכות שווה לכל ליהנות מפירותיו של עץ הדעת. עצם ההתוועדות שלכם כאן יחדיו היא ביטוי של תמיכה ביהודה וחזונה של הספרייה, ואנו אסירי תודה על כך. אנו זקוקים לעזרתכם ולעצתכם. אני מודה לכולכם בשמה של הספרייה הלאומית ומאחל לכולנו דיונים מרתקים. תודה רבה.
Thank you, David. Let us now welcome Arkady Duchin back to the stage. Arkady's second song this evening is called If Already Alone. In Hebrew, מיליוני אנשים לבד. The words and composition are by Arkady.
ולא כמו בעבר, ולא כמו שדובר, הכל עומד, לא זז. עצב, גשם, אהבה, לא משנים דבר. משהו מת, משהו נגמר. אהבה רחוקה ברכבת תחתית שחוצה בלונדון, איזו שהיא כיכר, לי כותבת, קצת קל עכשיו, מתי אתה בא? כי מיליוני אנשים לבד, ואם כבר לבד אז שיהיה בתנועה, שנתחמם, שלא נקפא, שלא נשתגע. מיליוני אנשים לבד, ואם כבר לבד אז שיהיה בתנועה, שנתחמם, שלא נקפא, שלא נשתגע. זה משתנה אבל לאט, ומשנה כל כך מעט. איפה אני ואיפה את? את לא כאן, את בראש, את ברכבת תחתית, ואולי את בכלל לא אמיתית, והמצאתי שקר ושאכפת לך מתי אני בא. כי מיליוני אנשים לבד, ואם כבר לבד אז שיהיה בתנועה, שנתחמם, שלא נקפא, שלא נשתגע. מיליוני אנשים לבד, ואם כבר לבד אז שיהיה בתנועה, שנתחמם, שלא נקפא, שלא נשתגע. כבר לבד שיהיה בתנועה, שנתחמם, שלא נקפא, שלא נשתגע. מיליוני אנשים לבד, ואם כבר לבד שנתחמם, שלא נקפא, שלא נשתגע. מיליוני אנשים לבד, ואם כבר לבד אז שיהיה בתנועה, שנתחמם, שלא נקפא, שלא נשתגע. מיליוני אנשים לבד, ואם כבר לבד אז שיהיה בתנועה, שנתחמם, שלא נקפא, שלא נשתגע. תודה רבה.
I'm now pleased to welcome Professor Moshe Halbertal, the chair of this evening event. Moshe has been the chairman of the Global Forum of the National Library of Israel since its founding. He is a professor of Jewish thought and philosophy at the Hebrew University of Jerusalem. I'm also pleased to invite this evening featured speakers to join Moshe on the stage, Professor Ruth Gavison, Professor Jeremy Waldron, and Professor Christian Joppke.
Well, thank you. We want to start the first session on immigration on the normative question. And by the normative question, I mean from a philosophical point of view, from a political theory point of view, to what degree states have a right to constitute boundaries, to block entry, to define who's in, who's out. And if they have any right for that, what sort of criteria they are entitled to use when they block entry. For example, do we have a clear distinction between refugees and immigrants? And this is a very, very essential question. By the way, it has a great impact and implication on our very conception of what a state is as a political community. That's a kind of a deep normative question at the core of our discussion for this panel. I'm saying the forum is dedicated, the purpose of the forum is dedicated to discuss contemporary issues that are at the center of contemporary civilization. It's enough to think about what happened last week in New Zealand, where there's a brutal murder of mostly Muslim immigrants by a white supremacist, to understand that the problem and the concern of immigration is haunting us as a civilization. The second normative question is to what degree and how immigrants ought to be accepted in terms of their preservation of their own culture, what sort of demands a state can or shouldn't impose on immigrants, culturally speaking. So there is a vast area of questions that we want to tackle, and we want to open our forum discussions with the sort of normative questions. Then we're going to deal with some understanding of the trends, demographic trends, historical economic trends of today, and the questions they raise, the geopolitics and other things. But we wanted to start with philosophy first. That's a kind of a prejudice of mine as well. So I want to really thank everybody who joined the forum to come to Jerusalem for these conversations. The idea is really a conversation. And this is why we have panelists who will present a short presentation. We will try to engage also in questions and answers. We'll have a second round to discuss. Now, I don't want to spend too much on introductions. I just want to say one thing about our three panelists. We have Christian Joppke, who's a professor, who did a lot of work on immigration, by the way, an author of a book, a wonderful book on citizenship and immigration, Veil, Mirror of Identity, and another book titled Selecting by Origin, Ethnic Migrations in the Liberal State. You can see this is a direct assessment of our issue. So Christian will open the forum. Thank you for joining us. Following Christian is my dear friend and colleague, Jeremy Waldron, who's as a leading political theorist, is published widely on constitutional law, on rule of law, on human rights, and also has written on the questions of immigration, touching again on the nature of how do we understand the state as a political entity in the world. So Jeremy, thanks for joining us. And last, Professor Ruth Gavison, who's a dear friend, it's an immensely important Israeli public intellectual, has done a lot of work in legal theory and in philosophy, and also, among other things, has struggled a lot with questions of state identity in terms of the complex relationship between national aspirations and democratic liberal commitments. She has been, among other things, the president of Association for Civil Rights in Israel and an author of essays and articles. So we have a really distinguished panel, thoughtful people, and we're going to start our conversation. So, Christian, why don't you go first? Thanks.
Yeah, thank you, Moshe. I'm humbled, first, to have the honor of the opening statement, and secondly, well, I'm least qualified to talk about justice among these distinguished presenters here. I get a headache if I have to read John Rawls. So I will tackle it indirectly. I will talk about a policy. I will do two things. First, lay out what I consider the structure of immigration policy in the West. And secondly, I will try to identify what the difference is that neo-nationalism makes to this. And by neo-nationalism, I mean our extended populist moment. I mean the double shock of 2016 with Brexit and Trump. In both of these events, immigration has been at the epicenter of the storm. And for pessimists, that was nothing less than the end of the world as we know it. Let me start with the banality. Rich countries' immigration policies are restrictive by nature. Many more have to be rejected than could ever be admitted. There are no clean hands in this business. This has often been overlooked, including by myself. I, like many others, have previously looked at immigration policy from the vantage point of advancing liberalism. It has made this policy less racist, more universalistic than in the past. Selecting by origin was replaced by selecting by merit. This is how you could look at it. Now, this analysis is incomplete. It needs to be updated by including two additional factors that impinge on immigration policy today: neo-nationalism and neoliberalism, or better still, neo-nationalism in the neoliberal context. I apologize for the neos here. They have a certain meaning that I hope will get clear in these last few minutes that I have. At least for 2 decades now, as a neoliberal order has come into its own, immigration policy has become bifurcated between two separate, rather opposite-minded policies in the plural. One you could describe as courting the top, recruiting dearly wanted, high-skilled immigrants. And the other is fending off the bottom in terms of unwanted, low-skilled, predominantly family and asylum-seeking migrants. This duality, fundamentally shaped by the needs and logic of neoliberalism, I consider the structure of immigration policy in the West. To this constellation now has to be added the force of neo-nationalism with its breakthrough in 2016. So in a nutshell, the question is, where is liberal immigration policy moving in the crossfire of neo-nationalism and neoliberalism? This is a complex question to which I will try to give a brutishly primitive answer in 2 steps. First, by saying a little bit more about this dual structure of immigration policy. And secondly, I'll put my finger on the difference that neo-nationalism makes, which, to anticipate my main message today, is surprisingly little. The dual structure of immigration policy. There used to be the assumption and the reality of fundamentally different migration regimes in the West. The classic settlement regimes of the Americas and the Antipode, and Israel is kind of a reverse version of it, kind of an America but only for Jews. And on the other hand, you had guest worker regimes and post-colonial regimes in Europe. Now, this reality of varied regimes is no more. Now there's only one regime, which is in terms of soliciting high-skilled migrants and of restricting low-skilled migrants. These terms, low-skilled, high-skilled, suggest that migration is increasingly looked at as functional to the economy. This, of course, is not new, but it is foregrounded in an era of neoliberalism, which may be best described as market fundamentalism, the canceling out of other social logics by just market logic. Both prongs or heads of this regime follow opposite principles. Therefore, no longer makes sense, it ever did, to talk about immigration policy in the singular. It is naturally policies in the plural today. High-skilled immigration policy follows a logic of, or a principle of soliciting. Soliciting flows where previously no flow existed. And that flow can never be big enough, also because of the competitive nature of states that compete for this scarce good. In other words, for high-skilled immigration, it notoriously exceeds the supply of it. The restrictive nature of immigration policy, by the way, is practically neutralized here. Think about tax advantages for high-skilled immigrants, which are in place in countries like Denmark, whose immigration policy otherwise is strongly influenced by the radical right, a force of neo-nationalism, that is. The logic of restrictive immigration policy is turned on its head here, because immigrants are treated even better, at least in that one respect, than citizens and other residents. This is a real novelty of our neoliberal era. Now the opposite end, low-skilled immigration policy, under which I group much of asylum and family migration policy. Here, the principle is not soliciting. Here, the principle is stemming flows that notoriously exceed the demand for this type of migration. Analytically speaking, this is unwanted migration, as it, in a way, exists before there is a policy containing it. Policy is notoriously suspected to be inefficient. There is the so-called gap, one of the few theoretical propositions in the literature on immigration policy, which is actually not rich of theoretical propositions. There's a gap between policy intention and outcome here. The migration here is notoriously politicized. It is the mother of all neo-nationalisms in the West today. However, let us not forget all this noise of the neo-nationalists on that area. Europe, for example, in the 1980s and 1990s still, from France to Britain to Germany, all followed zero immigration policies, explicitly called that way. And all these governments, whether they were center left or center right, fought tooth and nail, one could say, unwanted family and mass asylum migration in that era, with a vengeance that really rivals that of today. And at that time, these governments were completely unbothered by radical right parties that did not yet exist as they do today. This restrictive impulse simply corresponded to a structural nationalism, now without any neo, that is built into the nature of immigration policy as a restrictive policy. What is the difference that neo-nationalism makes to this picture? Surprisingly little. It scratches only the surface of this two-pronged policy, not its essence. For example, the radical right parties, as the most important actor of this nationalism, they're mostly totally silent on high-skilled immigration. They're not bothered by that. They are all into trying to resist low-skilled immigration. Even in Denmark, where the populist Danish People's Party has influenced immigration policy for more than 20 years now, the restrictive impulse actually already started under the Social Democrats much earlier, before the radical right was on the plane. And in essence here, the restrictive impulse is the protection of a comprehensive welfare state that requires full employment and that requires that everybody contributes and does not become a cost factor to society. There is a peculiar combination of welfarism and neoliberalism, not the neo-nationalist radical right, that explains the unique restrictiveness of Danish family migration and asylum policy. One must add, one of the most livable, fabulously rich and remarkable egalitarian society. But let us move quickly to the more dramatically and visible neo-nationalist interventions, Brexit and Trumpism. Brexit is the result of the most expansive immigration policy that modern Britain had ever seen, namely under the Labour government of Tony Blair. Stated as a counterfactual, without the fateful decision of Blair in 2003 not to impose, as most other member states had done, an embargo on migrants from the new Eastern member states after the EU enlargement, we would not see Brexit today. We would not see Britain leave the European Union today. We would not have seen that referendum. So immigration here is the independent, not the dependent variable of the story. The reverse side of it is that Brexit, much as it was conditioned by immigration, does not change much the structure of immigration policy, as I depicted it earlier, this dual structure. You might even argue that the policy will become, after leaving the European Union, more universalistic, because there will be no longer any favoritism for other Europeans. One of the most bizarre and little-known side plots of the Brexit campaign was to whip up South Asians against the discriminatory nature of the EU free movement regime. Once we get rid of this favoritism, touted the Brexiters, there will be more space for your family joining you from Bangladesh or from India. This is why many South Asians voted for leave. Trump's immigration policy, with its wall-posturing, family separations, its Muslim ban, is the most openly neo-nationalist that can be found anywhere in the West. But it builds on solid foundations that had been laid by previous administrations from Bill Clinton on. Bill Clinton, who started the enforcement drive that had marked or marred American immigration policy since the mid-1990s. Think about the curious fact that no legislation whatsoever, because the Donald cannot pass any, was required to do all this. And the dubious title of deporter-in-chief, it belongs to Barack Obama, who deported more immigrants than any other president in US history, some 4 million in his 8 years in office. With respect to Trump's Muslim ban, as you know, there was a decision of the Supreme Court. It passed constitutional muster only as a travel ban. That is, by simply denying its racially or religiously discriminatory intention. Of course, the most conservative Supreme Court in a generation and a breathtaking level of chutzpah was required to get to that. But there is no return in America under Trump to the openly racist immigration policy of the pre-1960s. The Supreme Court, in that decision I mentioned, even used the occasion, however slyly one must say, to formally overturn its own previous decision that had affirmed the internment of Japanese Americans during World War II. Trump's immigration policy, of course it delivers to his white working class voters that put him into office, is not a neo-nationalist Durchmarsch. But let me finish with a negative case of a migration policy entirely untainted by even the smallest element of neo-nationalism. Angela Merkel's acceptance of over 1 million, mostly Syrian asylum seekers in 2015. It shows that liberalism, here of course in the guise of a visceral pro-Europeanism, is still a potent third player in a migration policy besieged by neoliberal and neo-nationalist imperatives. But there's a darker side to it too. Not in terms of the cynical demography-boosting motivation that some had attributed to her policy from Danish to French observers. That is rubbish. More serious is the argument that Merkel's open borders policy helped unleash the dark powers of populism throughout Europe. And it started with the victory of the Polish Law and Justice Party, which was just 1 month after her ill-fated European quota solution to the refugee problem that, of course, no Eastern European country would or could accept. But also the Brexit campaign. It acquired momentum against this picture, this famous breaking point picture of an uncontrolled refugee tsunami that Merkel unfortunately helped to create. The ultimate irony, of course, is that Merkel's resolutely defended open borders stance, there cannot be an upper limit, an Obergrenze to refugee acceptance, she still insists today. It only worked through a deal, properly called a deal, with one of the world's leading populists and human rights offenders, the Turkish Sultan. So the German situation is the borders continue to be open for refugees, but refugees cannot come any longer. And about both of these things, the Germans are quite happy. What is the quintessence of all this? Let me put it in the words of Catherine Dauvergne, a Canadian lawyer who studies immigration and has written an interesting book. She says, "It is impossible for immigration law to fully embrace a liberal paradigm because of its role in constituting the border." And to return to my opening metaphor, there are no clean hands in this.
Well, thank you, thank you. This is a very bold way of restating or reframing the question we are trying to address. It's kind of I would say, a combination of a very cold shower and a very warm shower. So really, thanks. Jeremy, please, if you'd like to take the podium. Thank you very much.
Good evening. It's an honor to be back in Israel and to participate on this platform with these people. And I'm most grateful to the National Library of Israel for the invitation. I'm a serial migrant. I'm a New Zealander living in New York. I'm a New Zealander, so these remarks in part a tribute to the memory of the 50 migrants and refugees, men, women, and children who died in Christchurch the day before yesterday. When slaughter and prejudice are in the air, we need to go back to fundamentals. And if you will bear with me, I will be talking normatively and I will be talking foundationally about the basis of immigration policy. I take the topic of this panel very seriously. This is about justice in migration. It's not just about the justification of migration policy. I don't get a headache when I read John Rawls, and that I'm not proud of that. But we are charged this evening with looking at migration from the perspective of justice. And it goes without saying that justice is not the only perspective from which migration, and specifically the alleged right to exclude immigrants, might be examined. Justice is one perspective among others. It is massively important. It might be unjust to exclude migrants from entering a country, but at the same time, politically advantageous to exclude them. Or it might be conducive to economic prosperity to exclude them, or it might help us defuse the anger of neo-nationalist movements, but it might still be unjust. So justice doesn't pick up every aspect of policy justification. And if we find the other perspectives persuasive, that doesn't make them perspectives of justice. Justice has an integrity of its own. Our moral principles tell us what information to look for. They say if you want to know whether this is right or wrong, go out and look at this and that. That's what principles do. And principles of justice are likely to be insistent, quite inconveniently insistent, on our being willing to gather and weigh information that we are not always comfortable gathering. It's customary in migration debates to ask whether restricted, unrestricted, or less restricted immigration would make the existing inhabitants of the country which the immigrants are seeking to enter better or worse off. And that is important information, and it's important that it be gathered in a form that is amenable to justice analysis. That is, it must be disaggregated, so we have some understanding of how this is impacting on individual men and women, not just on gross national products. It must be disaggregated region by region in any given country. Echelon by echelon of our highly unequal economy, we have to ask, how does migration affect people at different income levels, living in different regions, facing different opportunities, or the lack thereof? But from a justice perspective, this information about the interests in the country, which is the receiving country, cannot be the only information that we gather. We must also consider the well-being of those who are seeking to enter the country, whether that will be enhanced or diminished by a given immigration policy, not to mention the well-being of those they leave behind. We may restrict the universe of interests that we take into account for all sorts of reasons, but we cannot do so from the perspective of justice. Perspective of justice requires us to consider all of the interests that are affected in the matter. In fact, I'm inclined to say that an examination of the issue of migration from the point of view of justice necessarily involves intersocietal as well as intra-societal comparisons. It implicates global justice. If you consider two societies, Society A, whose inhabitants are very poor, and Society B, whose inhabitants are rich, perhaps unconscionably rich in comparison with the inhabitants of A. Consider that pair of societies in these circumstances blocking members of A, the poor, from moving to the greater opportunities available in community B is pro tanto, and at least at a micro level, a way of perpetuating whatever injustice there is as between the two societies. And so it's possible that we might want to reject the perspective of global justice in order to resist that conclusion, but that's what we would have to do in order to make that consideration in apposite. Justice does not only work in the currency of economic interests, it works also in the currency of actions and rights. In the case of migration, it works in the currency, I said I was going to talk about fundamentals, it works in the currency of human presence in various parts of the world and human movement in various parts of the world. And it moves in the presence of the fairness or unfairness of blocking such movement. Humans, we imagine humans being indigenous here and indigenous there, native to this country, native to that country. I don't have to tell an audience in Jerusalem that humans are and always have been migratory animals. Our natural relation to land and territory has always included wandering as well as settlement. Since our species evolved in Africa, bands of us have moved out across the face of the earth into other parts of Africa, into the Middle East, then into Europe, into Asia, into South Asia, into Australia, into the Americas. Finally, about 1,000 years ago, humans reached the last habitable place on the face of the planet, New Zealand. No more than 1,000 years ago, even for what we now call the indigenous inhabitants of that country. I don't mean that humans are nomads by nature, they're not. In the dialectic of movement and settlement, we need to do justice to both sides, to settlement as well as to movement. The impression should not be given that settlement is always temporary, just a pause while we gather our strength for the next migration. Most people move en masse or individually in order to settle. They have both the experience and the expectation of settlement conceived as permanent, which may last as a cherished place and framework for many generations, sometimes for millennia. Moreover, though people do move and they do settle, they participate in this dialectic in different and overlapping periods. It's not like musical chairs where we all move and then we all stop. Some are settled for so long that they have forgotten the dynamics that drew their ancestors to a particular place. Others are perfectly conscious of this movement. It is perhaps within 3 or 4 generations that they can remember the movements that people have made. Immemorial settlement can generate a sort of optical illusion. We are privileged to have always been the inhabitants of this soil. The indigenous inhabitants of New Zealand tell stories about having grown from the earth there. And probably my grandfather and great-grandfather would tell similar stories in a different tone about having always lived in New Zealand. No more than 1,000 years for humans of any sort. Humans were the first mammals to reach New Zealand. Anyway, you have this sort of optical illusion, and it can make human migration seem unusual or threatening. There needs to be a way of recovering. As background to our thinking about this issue, what it was like to move needs to be recovered in the consciousness of those in whom longevity of settlement has generated a sense of established entitlement. People move, and there's no reason to suppose that the great movements of the human race over the face of the earth has come to an end. People move even when their movement seems inconvenient or threatening to others, even when it challenges those others' settled feelings of entitlement. But the movement is for reasons, it's not arbitrary, and it's for reasons that have always motivated human migration: to escape danger, to secure subsistence, to secure better subsistence in a different territory, to reduce the precariousness of an existing way of life. It's a characteristic human response to circumstances, whether it's people moving out of Africa 50, 60,000 years ago, or whether it's people moving out of Africa today or tomorrow. It's a characteristic human response to circumstances. It's not perverse or unnatural for all that it makes us anxious. But when some move and others are settled, how can we figure out the justice of the assertion on the one hand of a right to approach and arrive, as against the assertion on the other hand of a right to exclude? Well, I'm going to take a sip of this water. I find the following thought experiment, is what we do in philosophy, thought experiments. I find the following thought experiment helpful. It's a sort of a Lockean state of nature. I want you to imagine a small community living with social structure but no law, with social structure but no government, but living together in a relatively settled way at a village or a town, reasonably prosperous, with established property rights respected in a Lockean fashion among the members of it. Think of people living together in that village, and suddenly on the horizon are others approaching their vicinity. Inquiries are made, and it is ascertained that the people on the horizon are not marauders or bandits. They do not propose to slaughter or kill or seize the goods or property or land. They just propose to settle in the vicinity. But their approach and their proposal to settle in the neighborhood makes the people living in the village anxious and upset. Might the villagers be justified in driving the newcomers away, screaming at them, throwing rocks at them, pulling up their tents? Is that something that it would be a reasonable thing for people to do? I pose it in that Lockean form, a sort of state of nature question, because I wanted to get rid for a moment of the antiseptic operation of the state, or the antiseptic stainless steel of the migration law. If we had to do this ourselves, if we had to drive people away just because they proposed to settle in the vicinity without stealing our stuff, would that be something that we should be proud of doing? Would that be something which it would be fair or just to do? I really want to emphasize this point about these not being marauders. I know the language of marauders is sometimes used by the President of the Republic, where I currently live, to describe, he talks about invasion, he talks about gangs, he talks about drug dealers and rapists coming across the southern border. And there's no doubt, I have no doubt, that people living in my imaginary village would be entitled to drive away marauders and resist bandits and defend their property and defend their possessions. But that rhetoric is not appropriate, for the most part, to either high-end immigration or low-end immigration in the communities that we are talking about, in which these fundamental reflections are supposed to illuminate. Those who approach our territory approach it in the same spirit as people who move internally within a country. If I move, as I did once, from Berkeley, California to New York City, I move not intending to dispossess anybody in New York City. I just prefer the opportunities in New York City. I move to settle there, to talk to a landlord, to talk to an employer, and that's what migrants intend to do. They don't intend to steal our stuff. They intend to settle and move on the same basis as we value the freedom to settle and move internally. They seek to involve themselves in the open and fluid economic networks that already exist in the vicinity. The market for labor, for example. They want to make them a life for themselves in our vicinities in much the same way that we make a life for ourselves in a particular vicinity. So even though we're talking about justice, and sometimes we talk about distributive justice, we're not talking about migration as a form of redistribution. There are issues about welfare entitlements and so on, and we have to talk about that, but it's not a fundamental issue. The migrants are not proposing that land be redistributed to accommodate them any more than I and my family proposed to redistribute land in New York when we moved there. It's a state of nature hypothetical, I said. I'm trying to imagine away the state, just asking whether we would be entitled, us, to rise up with our rocks and sticks to drive away the newcomers. But we have to consider, I guess, the next step in the argument, whether adding a state and a system of positive law to the picture makes any difference to the justice of the matter. People will say, well, of course, whatever happens in the state of nature, a state has the right to restrict immigration. It has a right grounded in justice? I don't know. Michael Walzer suggests in his book Spheres of Justice that states almost by definition have a right and a responsibility to control their borders. And it's a very, very common, if I knew what a meme was, I'd say it's a common meme in discussions, but it's certainly a common saying. Ronald Reagan is supposed to have said that a nation that cannot control its borders is not really a nation. And there are lots of versions of this. I think we need to be careful before we repeat this mantra. A state has the right to control its borders. Well, there's all sorts of ways you can control your borders. You could control the movement of ideas across your border. You could control internet connectivity across your border. You could control emigration out of the society across your border. You could control the movements of capital in a neoliberal world across the border. When you look at all of these, what is the right to exclude immigrants being assimilated to? Yeah? Is it more like these you have a right to resist armies crossing your border, like the Iraqi army crossing the border into Kuwait, or the Arab armies crossing into the border into Israel. Does that mean that we're allowed to police other things crossing the border? I don't know that we have any clear sense of what this mantra that we repeat over and over again means. Walser, for whom I have the greatest respect, quoted a saying by Henry Sidgwick, who was a great relic of Victorian utilitarianism. Sidgwick, in the 1890s, in his book Elements of Politics, entertained a view, it wasn't his view, but he entertained it for a few pages, that the only business of legal and political officials is to maintain order over a particular territory, but not in any way to determine who is to live in that territory. The only task of a state is to maintain order in a given community, but not necessarily to determine the membership of a given community. Sidgwick doesn't endorse this view, although I'm going to call it the Sidgwickian position for short. He says it represents a cosmopolitan ideal. It doesn't. I live in the United States. I moved from California to the state of New York. Sometimes when I was teaching at Princeton, I would move from New York to New Jersey and then back and forth. Those states have exactly a Sidgwickian definition. It's their job to maintain order within the particular community, but not to determine in any way who comes to live in California or who comes to live in New Jersey. They are Sidgwickian associations. Sure, they are within a framework, a federal framework that has a non-Sidgwickian feel to it. But I don't think there's anything utopian in the idea that a state doesn't necessarily have the right to determine how many people live in the society. Does the state have the right to maintain demographic control through a family size policy? If the state suddenly discovers in a forested area in New Zealand, down where I live near in the very south of the South Island, there's a vast area of forest, and we used to have myths of there being lost tribes living in the vast areas of those forests. If a government finds a lost tribe in the forest, it has to accept them as its citizens, even though it wasn't planning to feed them. If there's an uptick in fertility, it has to accept. So it's not entirely implausible. It's not entirely implausible to say that states have a responsibility to keep order in their community, but not necessarily a right to control the membership of that community. And I just want us to have that in our mind. I'm conscious of the fact that the time is running out. I did want to mention one last set of considerations, which are even more fundamental and maybe you'll say fanciful than the ones I've mentioned so far. But never mind Locke or State of Nature or New Zealand or anything else. It is often said, and I think said quite rightly, that as human beings, in some sense, we own the earth in common. It is our planet. We have some sort of original common ownership of the earth, which has to serve as background to whatever we say about borders, whatever we say about settlements, and whatever we say about migration. I believe that God gave the world to mankind in common, and we have to figure out territory and boundaries from that as a starting point if we can. And again, I don't think this settles anything conclusive at the level of law and justice, except to remind ourselves that this dialectic I spoke about people moving across the face of the earth, is people moving across the face of their earth, and that movement across the face of their earth is one way of inhabiting their earth. It explains the elemental acknowledgement that people have to have a home somewhere on the earth, and that whatever we do about borders, we have to ensure that there is no homelessness in this fundamental sense, that people have, that there is the distinct rights of refugees. Those who find themselves in danger have to have a place on earth to which they can flee, and if their life has become intolerable in one place, there has to be access to another place. And this again is not an argument for open borders, but it's a reminder that settlements and borders and policies are important, but they're not the last word in this. They're not the last word in this matter. We often make fun of people who are obsessed with justice, and we accuse them of contemplating the falling of the heavens for the sake of the doing of justice. You remember fiat justitia ruat caelum. And we convey by our bad Latin that a hard man or a realistic person or a good politician will not take justice too seriously. And maybe considerations of justice and considerations of fundamental morality, which is what I've been talking about, can be pushed to one side. Still, I take it to be the purpose of this panel that we should know what it is we are sidelining when we are talking about justice and migration. So that's why I asked this question, what does justice say? Popular or unpopular? Practical or impractical? Politic or impolitic about the topic of migration? Thank you very much indeed.
Thanks for tackling the fundamental questions we have to struggle with. Ruthie, floor is yours, please.
Great honor to be here. I asked to be last because I thought that the nature of the problem will be clear and I will be able to be more specific. But it seems that there is a deep human need to make very tough problems look at least a bit less tough. And I think immigration is one. And it's true that I too wondered about justice in immigration. And I think there is a powerful, very abstract idea that justice in immigration does require a thought experiment of a non-state, one-state world solution, global justice with, why not, free borders. But I think that the fact that we have a world of sovereignty and nation states with its many inherent injustices is not accidental. And I think when we want seriously to look at problem of immigration at our time, we do need to look at the fact, which is not removed from political philosophy or needs of human societies or needs of individuals, to do divide the world into political communities, into different states. And some are richer than others, and some are more developed than others, and many speak different languages than others. And our subject of the conference is borders, immigration, and identity. And I don't think we've heard anything about identity unless we talk about the fact that we are talking kind of critically, Professor Waldron and Jeremy did, about the fact that our blood is no warmer, redder than anyone else's blood, and there is really no real moral reason why I should be born in a free, democratic, quite affluent society, and many other people will be born in a desperate situation in which it's not only uncommon and unnatural, it's really inhuman to expect that they will not do anything in their power to move themselves and their families to the best of their abilities into a life that is a better life. Today, they see the way other people live. They don't think that their way, their regime, their hunger is the only way there is. They want to be partners to another way of humanity, and immigration policy comes in the way. And I would like to argue that even if we talk about justice, unless we want to unsettle the world, and I do not. So if we accept a world of nation states, not only as the reality, but also as a way of creating territorial borders real borders between communities, political, social, ethnic. Sometimes doesn't really happen anymore that a state is homogeneous in terms of language, culture, religion, history. All countries that we know are now countries that have problems of multiculturalism. But democracies, freedom, are built on a sense of demoses. Demoses are special kinds of solidarity between the members of the community. And the power to exclude is not only the power of a state vis-à-vis desperate people coming for asylum or even for a better life. The power of the state is, in a way of arbitrating between the interests of the individuals and the groups and the communities in one state versus the maybe much stronger expectations and needs of other people. And I think that this is what we were supposed to be talking about. And I'm afraid what we heard until now is not sufficiently addressing the complexity of the problem. So I agree, we're not talking about justice. I think that I want to make another claim. We're not talking about rights. The rights discourse here is very misleading because rights in the technical sense are entitlements that impose duties on others. Now, people who want to go to a country that is not the country of their citizenship or permanent residency, according to international law as it is, do not have the right to be admitted. They maybe do have the right if they are really asylum seekers, but they don't have the right to do what they really want to do, which is to settle, to have a new, safe, free, affluent life. International law doesn't give them this right, and international law doesn't give them the right, partly because of the interests of strong states who don't want to be flooded by immigrants, but it's also because the idea of nation states, not just civic states, is also using borders to protect differences, identities. And identities require usually a territorial base. And so I want, with the rest of my time, to talk about Israel, because Israel is in the focal point of all immigration issues. Because immigration issues are the issues of the state that immigrants want to enter into, the immigrants who want to enter a state that is not, in some sense, theirs. There is also an interest of their states, which I will not now talk about, and the interests of the individual and the people, the society in the state that is governed by the authorities that develop immigration policies. Now, Israel and the Jews, I wanted to do history like Jeremy did. It is. The history of the human race is a history of immigration, indigenous, dispossessing, replacing. It's a tough history. If we would have tried to do today what the world and humanity did through the history of humanity, we probably would have been described, all of us, as war or whatever criminals against humanity. So this is not the issue. The issue is that now we have a reality. And there is a conflict of interests between the society in the state that is the developed, rich, safer place people want to immigrate into, great compliment to that state, and the citizens and the society in that state. Part of it is economic. We heard about it, and it's quite true. Every state wants immigration. They want to have people immigrate that they want to immigrate. Rich people, strong people, creative people, scientists, Nobel Prize, these people are always wanted. But they don't want the people who will be a burden on the welfare system. Oh, that's quite natural. So this is the state as overlooking the interests of the whole political community. But there are the communities and the individuals themselves on both sides of the issue. And for both of them, it's in a way also an issue of justice, because it's an issue about the conditions that allow them their meaningful life. Okay, you don't have to allow yourself to be so much richer than, or to live in so much more freedom than other people. It's not clear that immigration is the way to handle these disparities. Okay, so Israel now has the three issues. Israel was built on Zionism. Zionism was a movement that wanted to move Jews into Palestine. When Jews were trying to move into Palestine before the states, the local population naturally, inevitably, not surprisingly, objected in all possible ways. Tragically for them, they didn't have a state, so they couldn't. The Ottoman and the British, and the British, long history. But the debate about immigration was the main reason for the partition resolution. Because the international community after the Second World War and the Holocaust, which understood how fragile Jews were in other countries, understood that Jews needed a place where they could belong, but they also understood that they need to calm down the Arabs so that they will not be afraid, which could have been the situation, that the Jews will take all of Western Palestine. So partition was aimed to let Jews and Arabs primarily have borders and control immigration. That was the main issue, because it was clear that for the Jews to get self-determination and what came with it, they needed to be a majority. The Jews needed to be able to take in the people who were running away from Europe and from some of the Arab countries. And with that kind of immigration, if they had the legal power to permit it, they could then create a majority Jewish state, which could hopefully live along a local Arab-Palestinian state and together have an economic union and make the best of a very difficult situation. So Israel was on the side of those who collectively, ideologically, needed to move people from their country of citizenship, unless they lost it by all kinds of nice moves in their countries of residence, into their old homeland, which was now taken by another people. And they dispossessed them. And they did to the Palestinians what they were afraid of and what they objected to, and they still do. This is part of why this conflict persists. Okay, so Jews wanted to bring in Jews, and now they have the law of return, which declares a state right for all Jews and members, families of Jews to come in. I can't go into that. Okay, so Israel is now also very strong on the excluding side. And the excluding side is on two levels, at least. It has all kinds of very, it encourages some kinds of immigration, of course. But it also has two excluding fronts. One is the Palestinians who want to come in under family unification or under the law, the right of return, allegedly right. Is it a right? Is it not a right? Is it recognized? Is it not recognized? What it means to the Jewish majority? Big issue. Interesting very much that many people who are very much against the Palestinian right of return are the same Jews who are now for expanding the borders of Israel to include many more Palestinians who are now on the West Bank. But we're not going to look into the details of Israeli policy on that one. But then Israel has a relatively new front of immigration fighting, and this is people coming from the southern border and from other places who find Israel a freer, richer, more open country. They're not Jews, so they're not entitled to come under the law of return, and they want to come in. And this group is the one that presents the kind of problem that most of the Western world is grappling with. Because this group is the group that it's really heartbreaking and sometimes legally impossible to let these people go back or ask them or demand them or send them back to where they came from. And the tragedy is that a country that does not control its borders physically may indeed be subjected to floods of immigrants, desperate immigrants, entitled immigrants, people who it's very difficult to send away. But to say that this is not so terrible is a total mistake, because Israel is a very small country, small population, very densely occupied, in the middle of a conflict between two peoples and internal conflicts between all kinds of sub-communities. And even 100,000, not to mention 1 million, can really unsettle its demographic. It's like Lebanon is arguing about the Palestinians. It's much more desperate about the Palestinians in other countries because of its size and the impact of the Palestinians on its demography. There is another issue with this kind of immigration. If the issue is how to enter, like we see in Europe, how we now see in part in America, and in Asia, if you enter and you start living in the country, then there is the issue of health and education and feeding you and taking care of your traumas from getting in and all kinds of very, very complicated issues. And there is a problem of where these people live and how they affect the kind of the life of the communities within which they live, which usually are the weaker parts of the local community, because this is where it's cheapest to live. And now the issue is mixed marriages, children. Children, this is a dynamic group. Unlike refugees who come and want to go somewhere else, this is a group that wants to settle, and if they settle, they don't want simply to settle individually. They would like to bring their families. Some of them are already married and have children. Others have families here, created families, and have children. And this is a very serious issue for education, schools. How do you deal with their needs? Do you teach them an Israeli curriculum, Hebrew? Or do you teach them their various cultural heritages? What do you do with this phenomenon? And I think the unwillingness to address these serious questions and to understand that it's not about charity and compassion, it's about creating a level of solidarity within your particular political community that sometimes, like in Israel, needs to grope and cope with enormous conflicts and debates. I think that this is the challenge, and I think what we are doing by talking about this in rights and justice terms is terrible because it is not helping the issue. Helping the issue needs international responsibility for the issue of immigration by investing a lot in local habitats. People don't leave their homes unless they have to. By investing a lot more in demanding more freedom in African communities. By a developing policy that demands improving the conditions in the places which import most of the immigrants. And unless we understand that this is not about rights, this is about policy and broad international policy. And if the international community cannot really address this huge international issue, we are making a mistake when we talk about justice. If people on a boat have other people dying in the Titanic. And they said, take us on. And they say, no, we can't take you on, because if we take all of you on, we'll all go under. This is a tragic choice. And you don't deal with tragic choices by talking about justice and rights. Thank you.
We have some time. We have some time for questions. I want to start with a question to the panel, right? And I want to start with. I was provoked by certain statements Ruth made, certain Jeremy. I want to start actually with a personal story of my own family. I was born in Montevideo, Uruguay. We don't have roots in Uruguay. I'm not an Uruguayo. My father and his brother were the sole survivors of a large family in Galicia. Basically, we're Galicianos. And I want to tell a story that will bring to bear a certain distinction I want to protect. Prior to the war, that was in the beginning of the 30s, when the rise of ultranationalism in Poland emerged. A cousin of my grandfather immigrated to Uruguay, not having enough funds. In the way immigrants usually work, the first father comes, then the wife, etc., etc. Last to stay was my father's cousin named Label. He was last to stay. 38, Label was struck by another problem. He got drafted to the Polish army. What did Label do? Infected his eye, right? So to be exempt from being part of hyper-Polish nationalism. At the middle of 38 comes a visa to Label. His father paid quite a lot for it, etc. The whole family goes to the port. The Uruguayan consul is there, looks at Label's eyes and say, you're not going. Your eye, that doesn't look good. By the way, Label was the first of the family to be shot by the Nazis in Landshut. Now, there is another story. After the war, when my father and his brother, the sole survivors of a large family, were in DP camp in Austria, they didn't want to stay in Europe. They couldn't get to Palestine. The only place actually that gave them visas was Uruguay. By the way, I always asked my father, when I was very sick, I said, what were the best years of your life? He said, Uruguay. It was a wonderful, hospitable democracy in the 50s. I don't know if you knew Uruguay in the 50s. Wonderful place. Now, what's besides the story? I mean, I'm sure everyone has multiple stories or was born in Uruguay. Now, the question is the following, and I want to ask two questions for the panel. One is, shouldn't we make a difference between genuine refugees and economic immigration? I mean, morally speaking, because there is an obligation of hospitality to people who are desperately at risk. Now, I know that it will be, every time you raise a category, there will be a question how you define it, which means it's a meaningful category. And there should be a distinction between those two classes of people. And I think the lack of distinction harmed both sides of the groups. And here I come to a second question. And it's about justice. I want to also talk about justice. I feel in that respect close to Jeremy's emphasis. Let's talk about justice. We always put into question the tension between identity on the one hand, preserving an identity. Some people will say this is a genuine political right, a self-determining legitimate right. And then there is a question of immigrants. I want to talk about refugees. Isn't part of your identity accepting refugees? Not about justice. By the way, In the European case, Merkel took the refugees, the Syrian refugees, not because of cosmopolitan justice, but because of the particular history of Germany in the 20th century. By the way, all the Muslim countries, we have to remember, the Muslim countries who take the brunt of refugees, Jordan, Lebanon, to a certain degree Turkey, they do it because of an identity idea of hospitality. There is a Muslim value of hospitality, which is very deep. So I'm not sure, I want to ask two questions. First, should we, and to what degree, establish, is it right from the point of view of justice that towards refugees we have absolute obligation of hospitality, no matter the impact on welfare, on this, on that, on culture, on this, on that, you have to take them. And by the way, not only based on a cosmopolitan conception of rights, etc., but based on identity, your particular history, etc. In the Jewish case, clearly we have some sort of a history here that puts us on a burden. We actually, you know, my parents' family was, my father's, they were trapped. And there was the U.S. closed its borders in the 20s, and they were trapped to death. So isn't that a real distinction to be made from the point of view of justice? Now, this is more directed as well to Jeremy, a question, and to Christian. Should we think of immigrants just wanting to reside in the counterfactual Lockean set, or wanting to share in the benefits of the collective project of the group, right? States are partial, are projects of partiality. They give preference to their citizenship. Immigrants are not seeking just to reside. They seek to be members, to be part of what we will call that unit of distribution called the state. Citizens, not just merely staying there, etc. The fact of citizenship in terms of sharing the welfare, all the etc. benefits and other things of the society. So I want to raise that as those two questions for the panel in terms of how we address this issue, morally speaking, from the point of view of justice as well. Now, so bear these questions in mind. I'm really sorry. I maybe took the privilege of the chair a little bit too much, but I was very short on my introduction, so I said, and then provoked by the wonderful discussion. So let's take another two questions, but don't follow my example, right? Yes, please. Yes.
This limitation on immigrants is not a neo-nationalist invention. It comes before that. But how can we use this logic also to your second claim, where you said immigration brought neo-nationalism? Actually, it is not. Immigration just became a language that neo-nationalists are using. It would be like saying, toxic masculinity is caused by Me Too movement or something, right? In Hungary, in Poland, there is no immigration. The numbers of people might look big in 2015. Actually, it is not that big. The coming was dramatical. Or 3 million refugees came to Syrians came to Turkey. There is now a huge neo-nationalism in Turkey, but it is against Kurds who have been there. So it's not against Syrians. So I think it is wrong to suggest that immigration is causing neo-nationalism or the far right, because then I think it is the argument of the far right that makes it stronger. How can we also think about it the other way around?
Okay, please, yes.
When debating immigration, we usually concentrate on two perspectives. What are we, the host populations, doing to them, the potential migrants? Are we being cruel by not allowing them in? Are we being generous by allowing them in? Then the opponents of migration ask, what are they, the migrants, doing to us? Do they enrich societies, or do they create problems within societies or threats? We very seldom ask, what are we doing to ourselves? If we accept a policy in which we subordinate the rights of immigrants to our interests and comforts, we change the nature of our society. If we allow a government to enforce that policy, we create a relationship with the government that is not going to stop there. We're granting it powers it can also use against us, and vice versa. If we engage in actual practical solidarity, say as Merkel did, we have the opportunity of transforming ourselves into something slightly better. And I think this dimension of the debate needs to be addressed.
Thanks. We'll take another question. Yes, Mark, please.
I just wanted to add to that to say that there's a fourth question which you leave out, and that is what might be the obligation of immigrants to their own societies and what they are doing to their societies when they leave. We all have the image of people being driven out of a place, droughts, wars, and all the rest. But there's a lot of elite immigration right now that is elites who've been educated abroad, decide to stay abroad, and there's a brain drain in these places. One of the untold stories or unrecognized stories of what's going on in Eastern Europe is that with the creation of the European Union, there's been a huge migration of educated elites out of Eastern Europe into Western Europe to find jobs. And so you end up with fewer educated people, fewer elites in a society, which makes it even more susceptible to populism. So there's a whole question of ethics, of exit, voice, and loyalty for the migrants themselves as well, I'd say.
Good. This is just a beginning, right? And each take a turn within the limits of the time we have left, and to relate to some of the questions you want to relate. Okay, who would like to start? Jeremy, you want to start? Or?
Sure. This is on. Thank you. These are all wonderful questions. I thought the last two were particularly interesting. Moshe's questions are fabulous as well, and I'll come to them in a second. But I think the question of the obligation of the would-be immigrant to his or her own society and the impact of immigration from that society does need to be considered, particularly in relation to Professor Gavison's comments about some way has to be found of enhancing the societies from which the immigrants come. Well, this is a way of disenhancing them, although there is the issue of the tremendous contribution that remittances from migrants make to the society. Paul Collier, in his book Exodus, writes a lot about this. And it's certainly true that we have to consider what we are doing to ourselves by maintaining oppressive migration policies. So that's become particularly clear in the United States very recently. On the questions that Moshe put to us, should we make a difference between genuine refugees and economic migrants? One question, is there a difference? Second question is, should we construct a difference? And if so, does it need to be constructed in a different way than the current one? Because, for example, one issue that is facing the world at the moment is that our definition of refugees is primarily oriented towards those who are suffering persecution, not towards those who are fleeing war or conflict. Yet I think any decent person in the room would acknowledge that if we are going to draw a distinction between economic migrants and genuine refugees,
it doesn't track the law.
That's right. It should include, and this is not a trivial matter.
Absolutely.
Because we're not just talking about people who are wanting to make better lives. They are fleeing napalm. They're fleeing the impressment of their children into armies. They're fleeing slaughter, whether or not they find it. when they arrive in the country of migration. And of course, we should think of immigrants as not just seeking to reside, but seeking to take advantage of the massive positive externalities of living in a prosperous economy. There are jobs, there are established networks of economic cooperation, there are loose ends that want to be picked up in any thriving economy, and migrant wants to make use of that. They also want to make use of police services and fire brigades. And I maintain, and this is something maybe that I disagree with my fellow panelists, that the fundamental obligations of government, the obligation to maintain order, the obligation to protect people, the obligation to rush them to hospital when they're slaughtered, the obligation to fly in thousands of extra police officers into Christchurch, is not an obligation that has anything to do with anybody's identity. It's an obligation that affects the duties of those who can and those who have training to the people who happen to be in their community. And the notion that those who came towards those mosques on Friday should have thought, well, these people are not the same identity as us, and therefore that particular hobby horse of identity should mediate our relation to them. I find that very, very worrying indeed. I don't want to take up too much time, but it is absolutely important, the final point that Moshe made, or the penultimate point that he made, that one's identity, if we value that in politics, can be the upshot of a migration policy, not the premise of a migration policy. Yeah? We value ourselves on taking refugees. We value ourselves on being open. The comments of the New Zealand Prime Minister over the last 48 hours have shown that identity being asserted. It's a little bit like Habermas's constitutional patriotism, rather than some sort of identity that comes before the claims of political community. Thank you.
Thanks. Ruti, please. But let's try to be short. No. That wasn't a critique.
I think you're right.
Take the mic.
I think you're right that at present there is no distinction between refugees in the narrow sense of the International Convention for the Protection of Refugees and other types of immigrants. But I also agree that it's very difficult to draw the line, and the fact that there is this expansion is natural, inevitable, and probably cannot be stopped. However, it's true that in terms of the international law, it's true that the convention did not have in mind huge numbers of people, and did not have in mind people moving as communities. Now, the international community failed totally in modern times in preventing the genocide in Rwanda. Now, it was its responsibility to prevent it. There was a need to intervene. This was terrible. And the fact that what we are seeing now in part is people flying away because of their identity means that when they come into absorbing countries, they don't come there alone. They come to form identity groups. Now, I want to make very, very clear, very, very clear. I think this is tragic and urgent challenge for the age. I'm not for just disregarding immigrants, not at all. As we just heard, there's so many considerations. Where should they go? Where can they go? What places should they go into? What kind of works should they work in? What kind of introduction to a different culture should they have? Is it really an accident that there is a lot of rape and sexual abuse among some immigrant communities towards maybe more permissive Western communities? These are real issues, and they need to be addressed. You just can't be nice and generous and say, come in, we'll just open our doors. It is something that needs thinking. But I do want to say something about identity. and this is, I think, critical. Yes, the duty of a government is to save whoever is in need saving without a distinction of religion, gender, of course, elementary. But we are talking about the question of should there be a power to a state to control in some way who in fact is in its territory. And I think that disregarding the identity issue here without paying attention to history, culture, conflicts, and other things is, to me, irresponsible. Let me take the example of the Palestinian so-called right of return. There are now, say, 5 million Palestinians who think they are refugees or descendants of refugees. If these people are allowed a right to return to Israel, then Israel loses immediately its Jewish majority. And the whole idea of a place in which Jews can develop the kind of Jewish life that can only be developed in a territorial basis of a Jewish majority is gone. Now, maybe this is required by justice. I don't think so. But we cannot just say this as a slogan and not look at possible ways of doing it. I think Merkel was very grand, but I think Merkel made a mistake. And I think the way to go is indeed what they tried to do in Europe, but failed. Now, there is a lot of fear creating, and there is a lot of talk about immigration in countries that don't have any immigration. There is an abuse of the immigration crisis. But if you look at Israel again, it's not that the government is doing something that the people hates. It's not that the government is talking in ways that the people hate. I hate the way my government talks. But there are many other people who want to talk responsibly and not in this way. And sometimes between the liberals and the racist, they are not heard. And this is not going to be allowed because a democracy will say something in elections as it has been saying all over the world. So I think that responsibility means that you should take care of who in your country says and wants what and how, and you cannot just sweepingly say it's between getting the immigrants in and being nice to them and not allowing anyone in.
Great. Christian, you have the last word.
Oh, wow. Presumptuous. The riddle of neo-nationalism is this. Who drives it? It's the losers of globalization. It's those on the low trunk curve of the section of the elephant curve by Milanovic. So it's those who didn't have seen their income increase exactly since mobilization is on the map since the early 1990s. But they don't go after the elites that messed up their lives. They go the easy way. They go after the scapegoats, the immigrants. You know, in a way, the letter was sent, but to the wrong address. And that problem happened earlier in the early 20th century. In 1914, French and German workers, they didn't mobilize as Karl Marx had envisioned across borders, but they took on the uniform and killed themselves. It's probably that identity politics is much easier to organize also politically than class politics. That is my hunch, but who resolves that riddle wins the prize. And my last remark is, I mean, there's an obvious tension here in the panel between the left side and the right side, even though it's, of course, inverted. Just one comment on that. I think this Lockean example, actualized by moving from Berkeley, California to New York City, probably Columbia University also paying for business class. That is just not the right model to look at contemporary migration. In 2012, the German Constitutional Court issued a very interesting judgment. In a nutshell, die Würde des Menschen ist nicht migrationspolitisch relativierbar. The dignity of the human being cannot be relativized from the point of view of, or for the purposes of migration policy. What the judgment means is an asylum seeker, however ill-thoughted her, or mostly it's his, claim, has the same right to the minimum social aid from the German state as native citizens or residents who, after 1 year of unemployment, become dependent on this infamous Hartz IV residualized, neoliberalized welfare that is still available after the reforms by Schröder that now, of course, make the German economy boom. If more Germans knew that after 1 year of unemployment, you have the same entitlement from your damn state than every other asylum seeker, I think many more people would vote for the alternative for Germany than actually they do at the current time. So there is a real a problem here. In 2015, 80% of new asylum seekers were young males between 18 and 25. Don't tell me that these are the only who kind of qualify as Geneva Convention refugees. And it's 90%, the real victims probably are just too weak and too resource-starved. They cannot even move across the Syrian border to a neighboring state. What a perverse policy is it to throw money at these 10%, kind of a boutique model of asylum, resolving the asylum or refugee issue, to quote Paul Collier here, why just destitution and misery is left for the other 90%. Something is fundamentally wrong about Western states' asylum policy and policies. They're completely ill-guided to tackle the new problem of mixed migration. And now the discussion should start. We have to stop, however.
Okay. So, first of all, Christian, I'm happy at the end justice has emerged. You took a stance, a normative stance, whether we debate it or not. It's interesting. And I want to thank the panelists for doing what is most important in a conversation, which is state their own deep conviction and argue about it. Clearly a very deep issue at stake. And I really, really have immense gratitude to you to bring up this conversation. So thank you.